This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman as we continue to look at Brazil, turning to the murders of the British journalist Dom Phillips and the Indigenous researcher Bruno Pereira, who went missing this past June in Brazil's Javari Valley in the Amazon rainforest. Their remains were found dismembered about 2 weeks later. This month, police arrested 5 people linked to the murders and identified a suspect arrested earlier as the leader of an illegal fishing organized crime group in the Amazon region. This week, a Brazilian Senate commission investigating the murders recommended a military operation in the Javari Valley to address the rise in organized crime. Well, Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez and I recently interviewed Indigenous lawyer Eliésio Maruba, who led a search and rescue mission for Phillips and Pereira, just returned to Brasilia after visiting with U.S. lawmakers in Washington, D.C. to call for an independent investigation into the murders. I asked him to begin describing what he understood happened to the men and his efforts to find them.
First, the initial thing we were concerned about as Univaja, the indigenous organization in the Javari region, was our commitment to find the bodies, find them initially alive, but then the bodies, and to understand what had happened. And as soon as that we heard what had happened, their disappearance, then we went to search for them. So after we had located their remains, the second part of our what we went about was to share information that we had collected with the authorities and to demand for an investigation so we could understand who had committed such horrible things to our companions. And the third part of our action was to really engage in broad action to ask the authorities to do their work, to demand an independent and thorough investigation. And that's why we reached out not only to the Brazilian authorities, but also abroad. And that's what I came to do in the U.S.
Eliésio, could you talk about the Dom and Bruno were working on a book called How to Save the Amazon. Can you tell us about the Javari Valley and the people who live there?
The Javari Valley is a very important area for Brazil. It is the entryway to 2 other countries. We're in a triple frontier there. And there are several social problems there to be faced, mainly the most important of which is security. Our work has focused on safeguarding our communities, especially access to public policies.
Fazer com que eles tenham acesso às políticas públicas e também de fazer com que a região.
And also to protect them from non-indigenous people who have other interests in our territory.
A nossa região, nosso território. Grande parte das populações indígenas que ali habitam.
Most of the indigenous people in the region have given us the mandate to represent them. So we are an organization that represents all the indigenous peoples living in that region.
Pelos próprios indígenas da região. A grande reflexão que é necessário que se faça agora é
So the reflection we bring, the problem we bring is how is Brazil taking care of its borders and how is Brazil taking care of its original indigenous people? Because we are dying and our partners are dying, and we're dying in a very abrupt and cruel manner.
O que tem acontecido é uma não atuação do país, do Brasil.
What we've observed in the region is a deliberate lack of action by the Brazilian government, and that has led to the victimization of our peoples, non-protection of our peoples and of our territory in the national and international scenario. This is the great issue and the great dilemma in the Javari Valley.
Can you describe how life has gotten worse for indigenous people under the current president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro?
Essa é uma questão que o país.
The losses have been suffered by the whole population, not just by the indigenous population under this Bolsonaro's administration. But the indigenous peoples have suffered more because we are much more dependent on public policies.
Na medida que o próprio presidente desmonta as políticas públicas
When the president dismantles public policies and public institutions that should serve indigenous rights, when the government persecutes its civil servants whose mandate it should be to protect the indigenous peoples and the policies applied to them, we become more vulnerable. And that is why indigenous organizations, and specifically here, Univaja, have had to take on the role of protection of fundamental rights in our region.
Eu acredito que esse tempo vai passar.
I do believe that time will change this, but I don't know how much time we can continue to endure this, how much time we have left before help comes to us. We have so many people who have been murdered. We have many others who are being threatened. So we don't know how long we'll be able to endure this.
Eliezer Maruva, if you could tell us, I mean, you are incredibly brave to have launched the investigation into Dom and Bruno, because, of course, what they faced in their murders is, as you're explaining, is the threat to so many people in the Javari region and the Amazon. Talk about what you found, and if you feel that there's any connection to the highest ranks of the Brazilian government, right to Jair Bolsonaro, at least the attitude toward preserving the Amazon.
A omissão do presidente Bolsonaro.
Bolsonaro's omission in terms of protection in the Javari region has opened wide doors to the presence of organized crime in the region. And what I did was to give visibility to our region, to the Javari Valley, because we have gone through problems for many decades.
Eu tenho certeza que eu vou pagar caro por isso, por essa escolha. Mas nós já estamos cansados.
I've paid a price, a very high price, for speaking up, and I know I will continue to pay a price. But I am too tired of the persecution we've suffered. I am too tired of just watching the difference between what the policies are and what we actually get. So it was really important to come to the U.S., to go to the U.S. and speak to members of Congress. I told them I don't know how long I have left in this life, but it was very important that we could establish this initial dialogue for our cause.
Eliezer Maruva, I wanted to ask you, you went to Washington, you appealed to the lawmakers here in this country, but to the American public, who doesn't, many of whom do not know what is going on in Brazil. Are there major American companies that are directly exploiting the resources of the Amazon to the detriment of the people of Brazil and the indigenous people? And if so, can you name some of those companies?
Primeiramente, nós fazemos
So first to say that we have endeavored to establish communication, not just with politicians, but with the public in general, with common people and society as a whole, because we believe that society as a whole should be involved and should care about these issues. We have what is going on there is a relevant theme for fundamental rights, namely the right to life.
É necessário que a sociedade se intere do que está acontecendo, não só na Ucrânia.
It's important that society is made aware of what is happening in our region, and the same way that they're made aware of what's going on in Ukraine with the war, in the Middle East. They need to know that there is immense suffering in Brazil, that we are suffering many losses, and it's Brazil, what they say in the international arena, their lies, and we have to bring this information to the public.
Outro ponto é a existência ou não de empresas americanas no Vale do Javari.
And you ask about U.S. enterprises in the area, not directly But we, of course, know that we have illegal wildcat mining in the area, and there are many tons of gold, for example, that are extracted from our region illegally. And where do they go? They go abroad, and they go to the U.S., and they end up in U.S. stores and in U.S. storefronts. So the gold that is decorating someone's arm or someone's earring or is given as a gift, that costs lives. That costs, it comes with our blood. It comes with our indigenous blood.
O mesmo acontece com a carne que é servida nos restaurantes.
And also the issue of meat. The meat that ends up in your restaurants is meat that came from the Amazon region, with big companies. So the meat that is consumed abroad carries the flesh of indigenous people. The way it is produced is a way that is harmful to indigenous people. It costs lives, especially in the westernmost part of our region.
Todos esses problemas nós conseguimos resolver.
And I believe we could solve these issues through a concerted grand conversation between nation states, where we would point out the costs of production of all of these products that leave Brazil, and of course in an international scenario, where we would be able to discuss the importance of preservation and the importance of respect for indigenous life.